Hey, it's Sam, and I'm making this quick video to continue with some of the videos I've been making explaining the sidereal zodiac and why this is what is used in Vedic astrology. And of course, this has been the tradition of India. All of the practices in the Vedic astrology books come from this sidereal tradition. And again, throughout history, this is well known, not really even debated, and particularly the notion that the Indians were always using sidereal zodiac. Of course, it's not really even up for debate, you wouldn't think, except, of course, now we have some who are using tropical zodiac rather than the sidereal zodiac, and sort of making the idea that the Indians were always using tropical, and that Rashis are inherently tropical, and other kinds of things that I've been, speaking out and clarifying. So, in a recent web class that I did with Kapil Raj, I basically talked about the astronomy and cosmology and, measurements and zodiac in the Yajur Veda, which is about 1200 BC, a long time ago. The Indians were clearly measuring things with the sidereal zodiac, and you want to understand something. Try to understand that the zodiac, these two rings out here are the zodiac. These things in here are the Earth going around the sun. And you see they're measured in months. We have 12 months. We have 4 cardinal points, which are, for instance, winter solstice, vernal equinox, summer solstice, autumnal equinox. And then we have I'll say 4 seasons just to make it easy, because there's also 6 seasons, but seasons are also joined. At least they were back in the Yajur Veda, and they're supposed to be joined. We're supposed to join these months and these 12 months and these solstices and equinoxes with seasons. So let's say if we're talking about Western seasons, this would be winter, spring, summer, fall. Of course, in India they have 6 seasons, and they spread out also equally through 12 months. But we have to remember months. These are what are called Saura months. Saura means related to the sun. So these are Saura months, or maybe solar months. You have to remember, solar months, Saura months, are totally related to the Earth going around the sun. And the reason they're able to join and nail these things and link these things together inseparably is because we can predict precisely when we're going to have the solstice. We can say exactly what season that will be, and we can measure exactly 12 portions from that and have them work correctly within this structure. And that's what they did in the Yajur Veda. It was brilliant. So they connected 12 solar months, Saura months, literally a calendar. Think of this as the calendar, right? 12 solar months, and they had names for them. Again, in the web class, I talked all about them. 12 solar months, Saura months, that started on the winter solstice, and they were connected to their seasons. All of that, but they were measured, ding, 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 keyword, which is zodiac, is for measuring things. They measured them with nakshatras. Here I have the basic nakshatra scheme going around, and the fact that these might line up somehow is just a coincidence, because these are the astrology signs behind the nakshatras. Again, these things, especially these two things, these two zodiacs. This is the Rashis, 12 Rashis: Aries, Taurus, Gemini, Cancer, Leo, and 27 nakshatras. Right? You see they line up. Those two things have nothing to do with this. Nothing. Okay? Because the Earth and all of these things we're measuring on Earth are all their own sort of ecosystem that all need to be connected. They all need to be connected. Right? And so what happened when what we call the tropical zodiac was made is they took the equinoxes and solstices and joined them to the 12 astrology signs. And again, one of the things that has been theorized by several leading thinkers, in particular Dr. Robert Powell, who's a PhD, who had studied the ancient history of astronomical astronomy, and on building on the works of people like Neugebauer and Pingree, even though Pingree's a little controversial. The fact that they understood this history that I'm telling you about and the nature of the zodiacs is not controversial. There are some things that are controversial, but these are nuances. But building on the science and understanding the nature of the structure and architecture of the zodiacs and all of this, Powell basically asserted that it's not really even clear that Ptolemy was trying to pin these equinoxes to the zodiac. He could have very well have been, and maybe should have been, and maybe we should be interpreting it that the 12 portions he was trying to pin them to are months. And think of it if that was the case. Then we would have the months joined equinoxes and seasons, and of course we do in the West. But again, this didn't happen in India, where you then, if you were to do this in India, then you would be pinning the zodiac to something that's out of alignment with the zodiac they were already using, which was sidereal, and with the original Babylonian zodiac, which is sidereal. So we have to understand that the zodiac itself has always been sidereal. Its pure nature is sidereal. 12 30-degree portions of the zodiac signs, the 12 rashis, sidereal in nature. India always used the sidereal zodiac to measure everything, and so when this conflation happened, where the equinox was joined the zodiac, the Indians were like, no, zodiac is not pinned to solstices. Now again, in the early writings you saw these things mixed. You saw it in a text called Yavana Jataka, which was an early astrology text. I recently, on the web class with Kapil, I actually didn't talk about that one, which I could have, but it takes a bit more explaining. But it's the first astrology text and it also has this sort of confusion around the zodiacs and which one we might be using. And it's a bit of a can of worms, which I'm going to talk about it in another video, but it's a can of worms because it's the earliest astrology text that we have, and it literally means astrology of the Greeks. And then you see Varahamihir refer to it, but Varahamihir said several things about the Yavanas, and I'm going to do a video about this because there's a lot that needs to be unraveled. In that class with Kapil, I was just basically showing the science of the sidereal zodiac. It wasn't every single thing I could have possibly said, because even in the comments, although the comments have been overwhelmingly like, people are so happy to see the science being explained, there's things like, well, you didn't talk about this. Well, what about this? What about this? Of course, there's so much that can be said, and I'll be talking more about it. But the point is this. Because the zodiac in India has always been purely sidereal, when the Rashis arrived, described that way in those early texts, Surya Siddhanta was one that I did talk about, and the Conflation, because this is the main text that some who feel that India made this big mistake by not using sidereal zodiac, and those who say the sidereal zodiac was a mistake and all that, the main thing they point to is Surya Siddhanta. But again, there's also statements in the Yavana Jataka. But when they saw these statements, they did not convert their sidereal system to accommodate this totally unintuitive tropical rashis. So just think about what that would have been. Sidereal nakshatras and tropical rashis, you're looking up at the sky, and instead of it being one sky, there are two different measurements. So that's not what happened. Back in the Vedas, back in the Yajur Veda, and I talked about this at great length in the class with Kapil. I'll put a link down here so you can see it. They measured everything with the nakshatras. So for instance, it says there in the Yajur Veda that at the time that this Veda was written, you had the winter solstice happening in the nakshatra of Shravishta, or Dhanishta, as it's now called. And you had the winter solstice happening, winter solstice in Shravishta, summer solstice in Aslesha, which put it at, in the Rashis of Cancer Capricorn. But again, they didn't have Rashis then, so they didn't say Cancer Capricorn. They just measured it with nakshatras. So not only did they measure the space with nakshatras, so again, you have these things are all Earth, Sun based. Earth going around the Sun. Again, equinoxes, months, just like a calendar month, think calendar, and I know I have to say this over again, but people get confused. 12, isn't that a zodiac? No, these are months and seasons measured with nakshatras, saying it happens here. When you have the new moon in Shravishta, that's when you start what's called a yuga. They had a 5-year cycle. And how did they measure that yuga? Again, they measured the time of the yuga in nakshatras. 135 nakshatras, sun nakshatras, was the yuga. So they not only measured time, they not only measured space, saying that it was this nakshatra on the solstice and equinoxes, but they measured time. So space and time were measured in nakshatras, which is purely sidereal. It's called sidereal time. So sidereal time and sidereal space, the Indians, purely sidereal. So again, any idea, any notion that the Indians were always using tropical, it's just fiction. So again, this is not debated by anyone throughout history. Anyone. I've never heard anyone even theorize until recently with some of these guys who say that. And again, and I'm not talking about astrologers. You have to be clear. We're talking about the archaeoastronomers that have went back and read the Sanskrit and the cuneiform tablets and the hieroglyphics and all of this. These people understand this stuff, and they're looking and they're, okay, yes, purely sidereal. And they probably understood that there was a precession of the equinoxes because they were measuring things in nakshatras, and they measured them correctly. And so they obviously realized that it used to be, there was an indication that the Rig Veda, I believe, was, instead of a Slesha nakshatra, it was Magha. So by the time of the Yajur Veda, it wasn't Magha anymore, it was a Slesha. So we would assume and infer that they understood that there was a precession back in the Vedas. And again, all of this is purely sidereal. There's nothing tropical about this at all. You just have to understand there was not a single mention of a single astrology sign in the Vedas. Pure and simple. Issue done. And because they've mentioned 12, even in the Rig Veda, 12 spokes of the wheel of time, the beings are placed on this. All kinds of amazing hymns from the Rig Veda that talk about the sun at the center and the 12 spokes, and beings are placed on those spokes. These are 12 months. This is not a zodiac at that time by any means. At least we don't see it. So just to clarify that, because it's a bit of a complicated concept for sure, because people are used to seeing this idea and even this term tropical. Stop saying tropical if you're trying to understand this. Think of these as solar months or Sora months. That's the Sanskrit word. Sora means solar. And when you see solar or Sora, it simply means Earth going around the sun. Don't think about a zodiac. It's not. And you'll see these terms used interchangeably, even in scientific texts. And I think this is why these guys are confused. Again, just not being thorough, that the zodiac was not tropical under any circumstances. And again, we have to understand, the term tropical zodiac is not just a term you can throw around. Or, what you'll often hear is this idea, it's said like this: well, the Indians were clearly using tropical in the Vedas. They were using tropical. This term tropical is thrown out as if simply because the Earth was going around the sun, and the Indians were measuring the Earth going around the sun, well, that's tropical, so that's tropical zodiac. No. A zodiac is very different. The zodiac they were using was not 12 portions. It was 27 nakshatras. That's the zodiac at that time. And then later, when we started to see horoscopic astrology in India, and there was confusion about this, and by the way, there's definitely references in especially Yavana Jataka and also Brihat Jataka, where someone could say, oh, see, tropical zodiac, Rashis and nakshatras being mixed. Again, it's confusing to know because this was at a time when the zodiacs were pretty much already aligned. But what we do know, and we can't lose sight of this, is the Indians did decide on a zodiac that they used. This is not up for debate. They already decided. We already have 2,000 years of history to say they did not use tropical zodiac. They didn't. The only thing you can say now is that you think they should have, and you think they made a mistake, and now you're trying to say and prove why. And if that's your position, okay, I disagree, and the history and tradition of India disagrees. But if that's your position, then I guess try to prove it. But I'm saying there is really not proof for it. The Indians never used tropical zodiac. The fact that they knew the Earth was going around the sun, and they measured that movement sidereally, not just in space, but in time. Sidereal time. The seasons were 4.5 nakshatras. The year, the 5-year yuga was 135 nakshatras. Just multiply 27 times 5, and it's 135. And that's the sun going through 135 nakshatras for their 5-year cycle. So again, not just space, but time was measured sidereally. Very clear, nothing ambiguous. Every historian and scholar well, they haven't researched it that in depth for thousands of years, but since we've been looking at this in a modern sense, it's been clearly shown that the Indians were using sidereal. When the tropical zodiac did arrive, mixed with some of their text, it was obviously rejected. We have the proof of history to show us that. And this happened when the Greeks pinned the zodiac to the seasons. And again, even that has been a suspect move. Some people aren't really sure. And again, there's proof, or it's certainly easy to speculate about how that might not have been the intention. And again, this is why you've had for decades now a huge uprising of people that use sidereal Western astrology, because they've looked into the nature of the zodiacs and they realize that the tropical zodiac itself is a conflation of these things. And some feel a sort of irrational conflation, that it doesn't make sense to be measuring objects moving around the Earth based on projecting our position based on precession of the equinoxes into space. That's what it is. And again, if it does work better for you, that's fine. I'm not saying it's wrong. But if you look at the traditions of even when the astrological systems were developed, that's not the way the sky looked. Even at the time Western astrology was developed, the sky looked the way it still looks now when we practice sidereal astrology. So this is the other reason. It's very clear to say, well, the sky looked that way a couple thousand years ago. This is what they were saying then. Now it's like moved over here. And so the stellar positions don't make sense anymore. And so again, if you're connected to the astrology of the sky, and you think astrology is cosmology connected to the sky, and that the sky itself, the stars, the universe, is how energy is coming to Earth, then you're talking about the sidereal zodiac. It's just that simple. And again, if you're doing astrology thinking that your planet in Cancer is actually in that zodiac and you're using tropical, or it's near those stars and you're using tropical zodiac, it's not. And again, I don't know how many of us, and I'm sure many of us have experienced this before, especially who use sidereal zodiac, and people don't understand when I say, well, it's the new moon in Leo, and they'll be like, it's Virgo, what are you doing? And they don't even realize that there's a difference. So again, these are confusing themes for a lot of people. So the biggest thing is to educate people, and that's my main focus. And yes, I am talking about those who are confusing Vedic astrology and confusing a lot of students, mainly with these ideas that are not true. Mainly with these ideas that say Indians always used tropical. Indians should have been using tropical if they knew what they were doing. Or whatever it is. Sidereal zodiac is a mistake. I mean, this is the stuff you hear. And it's just not true. So anyway, I wanted to explain this because it's really important to understand this is the cosmology of the Yajur Veda. And again, if they would have returned to that and kept the integrity of this, not conflated the zodiac here, and then this conflation got the seasons mixed up with the zodiac. This is why now we're even celebrating Makar Sankranti, which is, and also the seasons are out of alignment in a lot of sections of India, but we also got Makar Sankranti messed up now, which is the northern course and the southern course, the ayanas. They shouldn't be pinned to zodiac seasons. And again, to say that the mistake is that they're pinned, that we're screwing up because we're supposed to have them pinned to tropical seasons is just a mistake. That's not how they measured these things in the Vedas. They measured these with the nakshatras. And to say we're supposed to be measuring them with nakshatras now, that's not really the point. The point is we're supposed to know when we have the northern course, and the seasons are supposed to be connected to these months. What we should be doing is using the same months as in the Yajur Veda, connected to seasons and connected to solstices and equinoxes. That's the way they did it. If we were doing that now and using the sidereal zodiac like it's supposed to be, there would be no problem. I said this a few videos ago. We're supposed to have all of these earthbound things joined, and we're supposed to have the sidereal zodiac. We have the sidereal zodiac, and we have most of these joined, but there's been confusion. And so the solution to the confusion isn't to say, well, see, the Indians screwed up. They should have been doing tropical the whole time. Right, and that means that then the astrology system is two whacked out zodiacs moving opposite each other. And so then when you look up in the sky and you see one sky, you have to break it up into two calculations, which have nothing to do with each other. And then you're ripping the nakshatras away from the rashis. So again, something like, Antares or, Jeshta is now in Sagittarius, and Magha is now in Virgo, and, Revati is in Aries, Ardra is in Cancer. None of this makes any sense. And none of it makes sense to people that pretty much intuitively use astrology. Rohini in Gemini. So all of that makes a lot of sense, but you want to try to understand this. Really, if you dedicate some headspace to it, and if you watch the video that I did, especially that section, it'll make a lot more sense to you. But I wanted to just try to clarify this. It's a bit complex, but pretty nice drawing, huh? I'm not a very good artist, so I did my best to try to make sense of it. Again, so we have all this is earthbound. Again, solstices and equinoxes, 12 months, 12 Sar months, and seasons, and then measured with nakshatras, and now measured also with sidereal zodiac. Sidereal zodiac is the original zodiac from Babylon. The Babylonian zodiac and the Indian zodiac evolved together. It's hard to think they didn't when they're occupying the same space. Most historians theorize that they evolved at the same time, which is a big reason why, of course, when the zodiac arrived pinned to the seasons from Greece, even though it was confusing, and one could look in those texts and say, see, supposed to use tropical, but they didn't. The Indians didn't. So then you're left to either say, well, they should have, which means they're not smart enough to know which zodiac to use, or they were right. And I happen to think they were right, because Indian astrology with the connected zodiac works really well. And to think that it's an improvement, no, we figured out they should have done this. They should have used two separate zodiacs moving completely unintuitively within each other, where one sky is carved up two different ways. Nakshatras have no relationship to the Rashi. That's the improvement? Sorry, it is just kind of funny though to say it like that. Emergency.